As everyone knows, Copilot is everywhere, right? And it's been something that obviously since almost March of last year that we have actually really been focusing on as a team to understand the capabilities, the limitations, and really the real world scenarios of Copilot and what businesses can use as we go through, obviously, this adventure, right? And today, obviously, with this huge, powerful team that we have of all these senior principals and leads, we really want to go through a little bit more and have more of a panel conversation to obviously drill into some of those capabilities. So basically, we're going to do some question and answers. I'm assuming as well, this is unscripted, which is really kind of fun. So we're going to be drilling in, obviously, into these areas and sharing a lot of our experience. And I guess the very first one here, Kerwin, I think we want to really start focusing a little bit more, obviously, on the Microsoft 365 capabilities, obviously, of Copilot. So I guess to, Kerwin, at a high level here, just to start,
Mm.
what really are the Microsoft 365 products that have Copilot that are enabled inside of the solution today? And I guess the other follow up of that would be as well, where have we seen a lot of success around those as part of that too? So maybe you can start on the front and then kind of mix in the back end of where you've seen some of that success as well.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Scott, I'll tell you, one of the things that I was really happy with having Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that it spreads across the entire productivity suite. So whether it's Teams, whether it's your Outlook, which you'll see some overlap between some of the other conversations we have as we move through, your Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Um, as simply put, it can also work within your browser, right? The native Bing browser within or Edge browser within your 365 environment as well. So from that perspective, there are a lot of opportunities, and a lot of the places that I see folks using it. And when I say folks, I mean clients and team members as well. In fact, Outlook. I see a lot of use in, and we'll get into some examples maybe a little bit later as well, but from Word to PowerPoint and cross application within the productivity suite to just make to create some baselines and some simplifying of the core thinking that we would do for, how would I make this look to at least get a starting point. So from that perspective, I'd say across the entire productivity suite, and we can get into some examples a little bit later.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kerwin. So just to kind of understand that a little bit more. So when we think about Copilot on Microsoft 365, we're really thinking of like Word, right? Or
Hmm.
Teams or Excel as we go through that, right? And
Yeah,
I think that's been some of the areas, right, Kerwin, that Microsoft
true.
has really advertised in even some of their keynotes recently. What I guess at a high level, I mean, what have you seen as like some of those base capabilities that have
Yeah.
been kind of created in those apps?
Absolutely. So I'll use Teams as my example for this one because I'm a big Teams fan and a bit of a nut for it ever since they've introduced it as a single pane of glass to do things in. But utilizing Teams as an example, if I've got a bunch of bullet points I've put together in a Word doc or something I want to build on, I can take the point, run it into, let's say, PowerPoint, and ask it to, based on this, create a PowerPoint deck for me based on these points with any relevant stock images, for example. And it's not going to be perfect, by any stretch, but it'll be a base for me to start with and say, here are the images that I have. Here's a format I can work with. And if I've got templates available to me, I can ask it to please put it in this template. And it will search, for relevant things, whether it come from my user OneDrive or a shared place I have access to put that together for me. So I've seen that. I've seen that quite a few times. And I think that's great from a productivity perspective.
Yeah, and I've actually personally used some of that to actually really quickly like take Word documents and then
Hmm.
create a PowerPoint that has at least some content that's pointed towards obviously that Word document, but it looks like it's expanding even more, right? Because this is something that you can not only do like a Word document or a team
Oh,
summary,
sure.
but right, Excel, like the finance app now that's coming out, that's integrating obviously with Excel data with it, so it's getting pretty interesting, I guess, from that regard in terms of what that Copilot enablement is in those apps, right?
Absolutely. I think, and just to add to that, I think one of the greatest features and benefits of of rolling out Copilot or learning it is that it's actually in continuous improvement and deployment. So they're continuously refining it, adding more features to it, adding more capabilities to it to help make what we do on a day-to-day basis much more functional and, dare I say, in some cases, even more relevant to a client or client-facing perspective.
Right. Agreed. And even
Yeah,
like yesterday, they released the new GPT-4 model that's even more accurate, supposedly, that now is used
absolutely.
in the backend for Copilot. So it's continually improving, obviously, as well. That's a really good perspective, Kerwin. I guess, Theo, when I think about Business Central, one of the things that I had noticed was that, BC was a little bit late to the party in some ways as well, right? When it came to some of the newer features that were being added, but it sounds like that momentum now is really starting to catch up, and there's new capabilities and features really being added, right? Can you kind of talk to some of that capability, I guess, Theo, at a high level here as to what we're going to expect BC to have and what processes may be kind of really supported by that in the future here?
Sure. So I think there's one for the bank reconciliation that was already in the current version that that people are running now, which was a great addition, right? It because if there's one task that people don't really like is like doing bank reconciliations, right?
Right.
You're in finance, so any kind of help or automation that
We're
people
not
can
trying
get
to
there.
offend anyone in finance right
No,
now, just so we know, okay?
yeah, no, but it's so I think that is a great help, and we've seen people start using that. It's relatively new, so people are still need to get used to that. But I think that's going to be a great one. Really the first one. There's one other one for marketing, creating marketing text based on an item, which is nice. It's in there. But I think the ones I've looked some of the new features that are coming out in the new version that is about to be released here, and there are some really game changers in there that are coming our way now, I think. And the two that come to mind for me the most are the one where there is the Copilot for sales line assistance. So, and the idea is, let's specifically for people that are, let's say you're new to the company, right? And you're maybe also new to Business Central, and customers, wants you to put together a sales order, a sales quote. You're not that familiar yet with the product catalog of the company that you just joined. So instead of trying to find the item numbers now and trying to which items should I be doing here, or what did this customer order last week or something like that, you have this Copilot is you just talk, or you just can type in natural language what you want, what kind of item is this customer looking for, or if the customer says I want the same products as I ordered last month, kind of thing, and then it's looking through things like cross references, item attributes, all those kind of things that it's if you're just if you're gonna have to do all of that manually, it's gonna take a lot of time, and this is going to help users a lot, I think. So
Yeah,
that is the biggest one that I've seen coming our way.
that's really cool, Theo. I guess the core here, I guess, just to let the audience really understand kind of what's happening here from a Copilot perspective, it's really an assistive technology, right? Right, team?
Yep.
Like it's really something that,
Absolutely.
yeah, we're taking and then using to basically be like a co-pilot. And that's the thing I keep on relating to because I've got pilot friends that have co-pilots, and it's like you're still the driver. Like in a plane, technically, when you get into an emergency situation, the pilot is always trained to focus on flying, and then the co-pilot does all the other additional tasks basically. And we've seen the movies with this as well, right? But the net result, though, is that co-pilot terminology really does align to the assistive based capabilities,
Hmm.
which, kind of to your point, Theo, like when we look at Business Central and we look at sales lines, you'd think that that's a pretty, minor thing, but the impact that it can have, especially for new users, is really powerful. And we're seeing that kind of almost everywhere. It feels like, I guess, from a co-pilot capability. Would you guys agree with that statement, maybe in general?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do, yeah, and I do like, Theo, that you threw in there that it works on normal, like colloquial language, right? It is
Right.
right. It doesn't require special coding or anything like that. It does work on normal language, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and you can either type it in, or you can. I've memorized now the shortcut for activating the microphone, so I can just speak to it. Like just
Yeah.
you do on the phone. Hey,
Yep.
like send me a reminder in 10 minutes or something on the phone. You can just hit the shortcut, and then for people that don't know it, it's the Windows key and an H. And you can start talking to your computer and tell Copilot what to do, what to find, and it's great.
That's awesome. I love that. So I guess, when we think about this a little bit more, so BC is getting some more traction around this. We're going to see more features that are being added. I've even seen like automatic generation of like projects, for example. I think they did a presentation on that, which is really cool as well. I guess, Lavanya, I'm really kind of curious, like on the finance and operations side, right? There's just you've got the Copilot pane now that actually pops out, which is really cool to see. We're starting to see more Copilot Studio that's introduced with it. But what are some of those features then basically on the finance and operations platform that you're starting to see more and more of that we're getting questions around maybe as well? But what have you seen there, Lavanya, as part of that on the F&O platform?
Sure, Scott. And I can relate to what Kervin and Theo said, right? Even on the finance side, it's more of like a training assistance, right? You open the sidecar. Now I don't have to go to Microsoft Learn and, look for like how to create a purchase order, right? A new user going in. And if they want to just have like some navigation steps, like how do I set up this configuration? All that is something you can just go in the sidecar, type in your natural language, just ask a question, right? Like, how do I do that? How you ask a consultant or, a trainer, you ask that and it's going to give you that navigation, more like an assistance there, right? But in terms of a core feature on the finance side, we just had a preview come up in last month. And on the finance, they are focusing more within the instance and also on an Excel add-in tool. So on the Excel add-in, it's more of like a reconciliation. Like Kerwin pointed out, there are Excel Outlook tools, so they are using that on the finance side as well. So you can either bring in data from F&O, or you can also pull in some of the financial records from other ERPs and do like a reconciliation and try to match up transactions. So all the cool stuff exists on the Excel side. And on the finance side, let's say I'm a user, I want to go in and see, how many vendors out there who are, who it's due payment in the next 10 days or next 15 days, right? So today I can do that. I have all the workspaces. I can filter. I can go to 10 different forms, add that query, filter, and get that information. But with Copilot, it's all going to be a natural language, right? I just go in, type in that information that, a vendor in this group or vendor with this specific line discount, go and get me all the records. And that's going to provide you that information. As a user, our customers are going to make the decision how they're going to pay, whether they are credit hold. So all the decision making will be with the customer. At least it's going to assist you giving the data in a format which they can read, so they don't spend too much time, looking for those data in the system. So primarily on the finance side, we are trying to see like a lot of those transaction based, those query based coming up in Copilot. And on the Excel feature, it's more on the reconciliation. And I've also seen a lot of progress in the procure to pay space that's Microsoft is focusing, right? And mainly for a purchasing user, it's a big decision, changing a delivery date on a PO is a small thing as updating a date, but it has a lot of implication throughout the supply chain stream. Your production order can get delayed. That might just push out your customer delivery date, right? Now, typically in an ERP, you go filter, find out where those orders are, you try to search for it. Now with the Copilot feature, what Microsoft is aiming is you just go in and put in information that, okay, I'm going to change my vendor has changed the delivery date on my order. Where is it going to give what are the areas it's going to impact, right? So it's going to give you all those production orders that are going to be impacted. It's going to give you sales orders that are going to be impacted. And there's a lot of possibility. Like while talking to you, I can think that, you can also send out an email out to the customer saying, all these orders are going to be like future down the road, you're not going to get it on the delivery date. So there's just a lot of possibilities. And right now, as of today, we have that preview on the finance side. And for wave one, they're also planning the procure to pay area. We're primarily focusing on improving the purchasing process in F&O.
Yeah, that is just that's a lot, right? So on the enterprise side, and I've seen that proposed PO changes. I mean, to your point, it makes it so much easier to understand where data is at and being able like case summaries, like we'll talk a little bit, Ali, coming probably up here in a second, right? Like the summarization concept that's actually inside of Dynamics. Like I'm starting to see more of when I hop on a sales order, for example, inside of F&O in Copilot Studio, I made it so that I could basically pop out the Copilot pane, ask a question about a sales order, and it was able to provide a really good human readable, natural language response basically to that sales order, why it was on back order, like all these other attributes that I was like, I didn't even have to program that to look for it. It just figured that out when I gave it context. So it was, like you said, it just makes it so much easier then to understand what your data is at and what the impact of that data is as well, right, Lavanya, as you go through those processes?
Right, absolutely, Scott, yes.
Yep, that makes sense. So Ali, kind of getting into the customer engagement apps now, right? Like we've seen a lot of love on that side when it comes to the feature enablement for Copilot. In fact, I would dare to say or argue to say that it was one of the first Dynamics apps that actually got any of that capability added to it. And I think that's really because of some of the context in terms of like the summarization and things of that nature that was occurring, obviously, from a D365 sales perspective, right? But I guess I'd be kind of curious here, like, what are some of those highlights that you've seen from a Copilot perspective on the CE platform? And where do you think that's going and what's available, I guess, at this point that people could start really digging into and playing with? Because a lot of these features are, I think, more GA now, right?
Yeah, and I love that we got to this because there's just so many features available for all the customer engagement apps. We unfortunately don't have 9 hours to run through everything, but I'll try to highlight, the cool things that are out there right now in each app too. So we've got Dynamics 365 Sales, Customer Service, Customer Insights Journeys, Field Service. All 4 of those model-driven apps have Copilot capabilities within them now, which is really great. And Scott, you said that early on the customer engagement apps were getting some of the first love too. And remember that we had Dynamics 365 for Outlook that salespeople have been using for a number of years now. And I know that was one of the first transitions too, was getting Copilot for sales within Outlook so sales teams could use that. So like Kerwin mentioned early on too, we have a lot of crossover between the Microsoft 365 apps and the Dynamics applications, especially for sales, which I love because what that tells us is Microsoft is recognizing that people don't work in one application and they want people to be able to get the information that they need in the applications that you're working in. So as a salesperson, I'm working in Dynamics 365 sales, or I'm working in Outlook and kind of switching between the two throughout the day. And by putting some of that Copilot for Dynamics 365 sales within Outlook, you're able to automatically create opportunities, create contacts right from that pane while you're responding to people's emails directly in Outlook. And you're writing that data directly back into Dynamics 365 sales. Likewise, within Dynamics 365 Sales app, a lot of people out there, if you're already using Dynamics 365 for sales, you might already have that Copilot pane on the right that automatically opens up every time you open up your application. And if you have that enabled, but I know that's happening for a lot of people now, where now that's available right there, it opens up automatically and it kind of prompts you, right? And it gets you interested and you're like, ooh, what can I do with this? And so really what's happening there is, again, what Scott mentioned is some of that summarizing information, summarize what's been happening for me on this lead, really bringing a lot of that data together so you can see it in one short paragraph instead of having to like scroll through a whole history within the timeline to see everything that's been happening for your records within the system. you can query it, you can ask it questions, and I know a lot of folks on our panel here today have mentioned the natural language as well. And one thing I do want to call out with that is it is natural language. You still have to be detailed in some instances. So if you aren't quite getting the response that you're looking for right from the beginning, try rephrasing, try it again. You know, a lot of this is new features. Some of it is still very much in preview. So be patient and try to rephrase questions if you're not getting the right answers that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a really good point, Ali. I want to just add one comment to that. I mean, that's just like the prompting, right? Like you've heard all these like on LinkedIn, they've got the prompt guides that are everywhere that are teaching you how to prompt. Well, for me, candidly, it feels like it's a little bit easier to work with these large language models because my brain naturally typically goes to piecing or chunking things out to kind of get a if then, if then, if then type of logic with it. But that, I mean, there's an art to that prompting, right? And what you're going to get as a result really depends on what you are actually prompting as part of that question that you ask those models. And I think I don't know, team, have you felt like you've had to go down that adventure as well to figure out how to prompt better, I guess would be the question.
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think we've all had our share, and I think I would say anybody in this session would say, yeah, I've had my share of learning how to interact with a search engine or an assistant tool of any sort. And where it's the same, where Copilot's the same, is that yes, the learning curve is there. But yeah, I think for me personally, Scott, similar to yourself, where you're used to chunking things out, you can ask for things in a certain way. And I also have had the scenario, Ali, where you mentioned you put in a request for something, you ask it, you prompt for something, and it comes back with and I've had it say, no, I don't know what that means. Try again. And
Yeah.
it's great because you get to interact. Now you can interact and refine and go back and forth and add, but it's definitely a learning curve that can be fun, but at the same time, yeah, if there are some prompts that are there, and there are definitely useful tools out there that we're happy to share with it, as those times come up. But definitely a bit of a learning curve, I think, regardless of your past levels of experience with search tools, engines, and assistant tools.
I think you need to start with simple questions. That's why I like to speak to it, because then I'm more, I don't know, that works better for me. When I start typing, you start adding too many details in it, and then it doesn't know what to do. But if you start with simple questions and then you see the response, and then you can say like, oh no, I need to add this or that. So that's my recommendation. Just start simple with simple, straight, short questions, and then again, it's Copilot, so you can add to it if you need more detail or go another direction or whatever.
And I
That's
think I
great
should
advice.
go back and try, because as a consultant, I go in and search, like, give you all vendors in ABC group, right? So I'm so used to that. So I think
Yep.
I have to change my prompt as a user, like how they
Mm.
would go in and see, whatever Ali you said, if it's able to like recognize my language or not. So
Yep.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, I guess, kind of Kerwin, I'm really kind of curious here. Like,
Yeah.
if you think about like what should businesses really start being aware of, obviously, when they're looking at Copilot for M365.
Mhm.
We've talked a lot around this, right? And I don't want to lead the witness, so to speak, but what would you say would be things that we should be obviously focusing on from a business perspective? Like if I was gonna all of a sudden enable Copilot, can I just go in and click on it and be like, hey, time to go, let's have some fun? Or should I be thinking about some of these other things like security or setup or
Yeah,
or what, right? Like what would
that's
you recommend
brilliant.
there?
That's one of those scenarios where, and I've been working in security for a long time in governance, and I would say that, you know, I usually try to recommend, to keep it simple, compliance plus security equals your governance. Now, there's a little more to it. And in the Microsoft world, there are a lot of tools and things available to make these things, to make, that come to fruition. But I think for any organizational environment that is looking to roll Copilot out, there are a few key things that that we would recommend from a Stoneridge perspective. And um, the first part would be essentially knowing that Copilot is not doing anything that is not permitted or allowed to do. So what I mean by that is, if Scott, I'm using in my example here, if you and I are working on things, and for example, I reference something that I have access to, but you didn't, but I did it in an area that you and I are collaborating within, you don't have access to see that, right? And in so doing, is that something you were supposed to see in the first place? So what it will end up doing is sort of revealing or sort of bringing to light, resurfacing some of the gaps that you may or may not have within your compliance and your access and permissions to your data. And that's something that, you know, I'm going to say me, but also Stoneridge as a whole is very committed to making sure, you know, as a client or as a partner that we work with, that you're aware of, and we're definitely here to, you know, help sort that out with you. But overall, yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is looking at those access and permissions, right, and making sure that, you know, shamelessly plugging a Microsoft thing that they've had for a while, which is role-based access, right, to simplify those access and permissions to make sure that, you know, a user isn't inadvertently accessing HRIS stuff, or in Lavagna's case, accessing, you know, payment data that they probably shouldn't be seeing, right? So those types of things are what I would usually look at, starting from grassroots and looking at your environment, looking at your data as part of your global ecosystem, your organizational ecosystem, versus individual application focused. And I think that's where I would probably recommend taking a look at it from, or the perspective to look at it from.
And that, to me, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, right now, like when we look at copilots, I think a lot of people look at copilots as individual app copilots, but the reality is that the infrastructure behind that, from a Microsoft perspective, they've designed an infrastructure to then take these queries. We had it on the screen in the background that showed the copilot flow basically, but they take these queries and then they basically query data in graph. And in the future, my expectation, candidly, would be, why would we stop at just dynamics data, right? Like, why, to your point, Kerwin, like that security, that assessment of making sure that you've got the right permissions from a Microsoft 365 perspective is really critical, because in the future, within Dynamics, if I'm in Dynamics 365 sales and I'm on a contact card and I want to ask it and say, when's the last time I sent an email to this contact, and I don't have timeline integration enabled for email logging, well, it still might be able to figure that out, because it takes the data inside of Dynamics and then goes through Graph basically to get to Exchange, to get to your mail, to then find that email address, right? So I think, like, to your point, it feels like it's really important to start thinking about that security perspective and what you're going to need in the future here, because it's going to go beyond, I think, in my mind, just an app type of experience with Copilot.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. It's an environmental experience.
Yep. And that makes sense. I guess, kind of going back to BC a little bit, Theo, right? Like you talked a little bit about those features, right? But we've also started concepting, like, for example, the Power Platform with Power Automate obviously could be used with BC to be able to tackle that. I guess the question I have for you is, where do you see kind of the biggest opportunity for getting Copilot kind of embedded in an organization in the future when using BC? It feels like we've got some BC tools that we could use, and some Power Automate tools, or even Power Apps for that matter, right? Where we could make a change in basically a Power App that has a virtual table linked to BC that, basically Copilot can now see that data. I guess the question would be, what are those opportunities that you're kind of thinking through as time goes on here and as Copilot develops even further?
Yeah, so especially with that in mind, with Power Automate, just start with simple things, right? So if you want the Power Automate to create, for instance, I don't know, a SharePoint list, add an item or a customer when a new item or a customer is added into in BC, you can now just, using Copilot, start like with a very simple Power Automate flow to have that set up. And, it starts with just prompting you for, okay, which environment, which BC environment, which SharePoint list, that kind of those kind of things. But it opens up so much for people that are not really used to doing this kind of developments. And I see it as, so yeah, it's not really it's low code, of course, no code, but it's for it's not that easy for most people that are not that much IT focused. So with this Copilot, you can start with that easily, and from there on discover, okay, what else can we do next with that SharePoint? Now that we have the SharePoint item added, and now we want to send out a confirmation email, those kind of things. I think there is so much opportunity there that we will see coming now, and with BC and Powerhall, but also within Business Central. I mean, what we talked about with the sales line assistants, I see that's going to come with purchase lines, general journal entry, putting together your account schedules or finance reports, as it's called now. Those are the areas I think where we're going to see more Copilot added to it, and it's going to make everybody's life a lot easier.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I just want to give a candid example for the audience, very specific, obviously, to business systems, but high level, unmonitored email accounts. Everyone replies to them at some point. Like having Copilot monitor an inbound inbox, for example, like a sales or support at stoneridge.com, that can distinguish between maybe, for example, products that need to be or if I responded saying I'd like to buy a product and it was an unmonitored account, for example, you could set up Copilot to look at that to say, for example, here are the products that we sell or services. And if that email has, for example, any type of content that may actually be something that we should get a salesperson involved with, even though we say it's unmonitored, the cool thing about it is that it can then, kind of to your point, Theo, create records then inside of
Right.
Business Central. It could create like an opportunity in our RM or in sales. It could do that as well. It just opens up some possibilities in terms of being better connected with your customers, because we all know that I've done it as well. You'll reply to something, and then when the customer doesn't get a reply back, even though you said it was an unmonitored account, well, that could be a loss in revenue, or it could be a loss in a relationship as well. And obviously, these are some of those scenarios now that we can tackle with Copilot that were very hard to programmatically address, I guess, in the past as part of that. So, Theo, I think that Power Automate is just a perfect example of being able to extend it now to use those capabilities and then to use that natural language response really to drive that. I guess, Lavanya, same kind of question too. Like, what's next with F&O and Copilot? I know it feels like that Copilot pane is going to get more capabilities added to it where, for example, I know Jared Hall from the Microsoft team had mentioned that they're going to continue to improve that. So that way, just like we have in sales, we can have summaries of records and things of that nature. But where do you see it going, obviously, with F&O and Copilot in the future here? Oh, you're on mute, Lavanya.
Sorry. So
No
yeah,
worries.
right now the focus is primarily on, getting the summary in, right? So we have it in finance. Now it's going to be on supply chain, and it's going to be on the project accounting standpoint as well, right? But overall, I see that the Copilot is going to actually learn with the user, right? It's an enterprise application. F&O is an enterprise application. So it has to learn with the user the business intricacies in terms of how a business is done. And it is going to help. What I see is that it's going to help them cut down a lot of repetitive steps, right? You have a PO processing, every business does it differently, and you don't have to keep on clicking the same fields, right? So that's something Copilot might learn and come back and say, why do you keep doing this, right? It can automate and it can do it, right? And right now, some of those we handle it as an extension, as a customization, and that's something Copilot potentially can learn based on users' process and provide, that kind of information or insights to the users. So that's one aspect. I think there's going to be a lot of benefit, at least on the F&O platform.
That is awesome, Lavanya. Here's the dream I've had for a while. Just really candidly, it's one of those I want to have it where for each job role inside of an organization, you have 20 questions that you basically ask a Copilot and say, remember these questions. And every morning when I come in, I want you to send an email or I want it to be on my workspace inside of Dynamics. But what it will do is it will basically identify then potentially scenarios that are exceptions instead of me having to open up a report. And a lot of the reports in Power BI, they can be obviously, formatted to look at only exceptions. But just imagine now being able to basically come in and then have somebody that's basically pre-done some of the discovery for you inside of your job role on what needs to be tackled next. That in itself, if you save an hour a week, obviously that's 52 hours. You scale that to 10 people, 520 hours, right? It keeps on going. So there's a lot of these smaller tasks, I think, that would be really powerful longer term to have incorporated into Copilot. So that way you can focus more on the exceptions that need to be addressed and then figure out what you need to do in your process maybe to minimize those exceptions. So like you said, Lavanya, that learning is really critical. And I guess maybe Allie, this ties kind of nicely into one of the questions I have regarding really, how would I even do that? Like from a business perspective, if I want the system to ask 20 questions, for example, and go get that data, how do I do it? How do I extend basically the capabilities inside of our Dynamics apps to be able to then support some of those questions, I guess is kind of my question here, Allie.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And, leading into Copilot Studio discussion there and how you can leverage Copilot Studio to basically build your own copilots that you can use within your organization. But that's also where there's huge applications for the customer service group as well. Like you can build your own copilots to query your own website to be able to answer questions that your customers aren't asking you or your internal teams are asking you, right? So these copilots that you can build with Copilot Studio to extend the normal capabilities that the out-of-the-box copilots have can be customer facing. You can use them for your internal team. It really extends the capabilities that you have. You can query your own data. You can pull from SharePoint. You can pull from other documentation that you tell your Copilot where it should go look for this information, and really cuts down on a lot of that manual data entry that I think everyone on this call has alluded to at one point. But that's, I think, where the biggest future opportunity is, as well as where the current opportunity is. I haven't mentioned customer insights journeys yet either, but building out segments and building out journeys can take a lot of time. And there are Copilot capabilities in there today that can build out journeys for you by just saying some natural language, add in what segment you want to pull and what you want the journey to do, and it adds all the steps for you. And, again, you can extend capabilities there as well. But I think the key is really looking at these manual data points for all of your applications. And that's really what Copilot is going to help you cut down on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I guess the key thing that the audience should probably take away from it, at least from what you said there, Ali, is that Copilot Studio is really where you modify the first party Copilot experience inside of Dynamics 365. And there, like I said, there's going to be multiple ways to access Copilot, right? We're going to be able to use Copilot Studio to do a low code, no code type environment to be able to extend that Copilot capability. We're going to be able to use OpenAI, basically the Azure OpenAI service, to be able to access Copilot capabilities. We can build Copilots from the ground up without using those first party apps too technically. The examples I love to give with that is if you're in the medical industry and you're dealing with medical records, there's a lot of rules around where you store data and that flow of data, where sending it to Copilot from Microsoft, even though it's managed and secured from a tenant and security perspective, still may not be acceptable because you need total control of that flow or of that process. So it's really interesting to hear, Ali, like, if you were a customer, you probably would want to look at Copilot Studio to start that conversation, because that would then allow you, obviously, to extend the first party app capabilities from a Copilot perspective pretty easily. All right, team, we're getting close on time here. I think I've got like a minute left here. So I want to ask one last question, and this is a free for all. What is your favorite Copilot feature? I've got mine in the background I'll end with, but what are your guys' favorite Copilot feature right now?
I would throw out what I've had the most fun with, and it's not dynamics related, Scott, so don't get mad at me.
Okay.
But the designer is super fun.
And the Power
And
Platform?
well, just to be able to get it to make images for you,
Ah, okay.
right? Those are the Copilots that I have the most fun with. And it's a challenge because sometimes you ask for a person and it has 4 legs and you're not sure why. But I definitely have the most fun kind of creating images and logos.
That's awesome.
That is actually, yeah. I think some of the more playful things are where we have the most fun with Copilot. I totally agree with that, Ali. I don't understand the 4 leg part. I think that does happen more often than I think we all want to admit. But I would say I do have a lot of fun, just watching some of the new features come out. I was doing some work in the studio, Copilot Studio, where you get to really, and I'm going to use a term that I've sort of been using for a bit now, which is really you get to define it and then refine it, right? What you're working on. So yeah, even with those the 4-legged people that we design, we can just refine that as we move forward, right? And asking for more, or so I do just like playing with the actual functionality itself, as opposed to, unfortunately, really just taking in the moment of an amazing image that it can really come up with.
Yep.
And mine is really inside BC. So BC has in this current version, or maybe the previous version, added a new feature. It's called Analyze. It's on the list pages, and it's really awesome. It allows you to put together your own kind of like pivot tables. And now with this upcoming version, they've added Copilot to that. So again, for users that are not that familiar with how to put together these analytics or build something, a pivot kind of table on a list page, you can just tell Copilot, this is what I want. And that's I think that's really awesome for those relatively new users or not that familiar with that kind of stuff. So that's my favorite by far.
Awesome.
I should say, at least on F&O, I should say demand planning, right? Even though there's no Copilot, I mean, it's amazing the way the AI-based forecasting and a lot of those AI machine learning concept they brought in. I thought it's a great feature. And when they introduced Copilot, I think with the natural language and giving insight, I'm waiting to just look at the feature what Microsoft can bring in there.
That's awesome, Lavanya and team. Mine, I just got to say, Copilot Studio. Like being able to control and make my own copilots in any way, shape, or form that I want. For me, I'm totally nerding out on that capability and feature. So if you think about it from a developer point of view, I know we didn't cover a lot of that here, but you can make Copilot. You can have the large language model return JSONs that you can do conditions with and all that kind of stuff. So we're getting deep on that type of stuff now internally at StoneRidge. So if you do have questions regarding those technologies, obviously this is the team that you'd want to reach out to as part of that. So I guess with that, all of you, thank you so much for your time. In terms of Ali, Kerwin, Lavanya, and Theo, the experience that you've been able to share here, I think is just so beneficial to understand the reality of where we're at. Obviously with Copilot, we're seeing more excitement around it. We're seeing more adoption. We're getting better at understanding how to make it so that it's more accurate. It's just improving at such an exponential scale. So I really appreciate you guys being able to take the time to let the audience know, obviously, where those features are and what you should be looking at in the future.